Tell Telstar your news. May StarClan be with you!" he called as the two ThunderClan cats bounded away. On the edges of the uplands, they paused again and looked down over a very different landscape. Instead of bare hillside broken by outcrops of rock and patches of heather, Fireheart saw a scattering of two-leg nests among fields and hedgerows. In the distance, the thunder path cut a swath across the land, while beyond that jagged hills reared up, their barren slopes looking gray and threatening. Fireheart swallowed. That desolate region was where they were heading. He realized that Cinderpelt was looking at him with understanding in her blue eyes. "Everything's different," Fireheart confessed. "You saw those WindClan cats. Even they don't treat me the same way anymore." He knew he could never say these things to anyone except the Medicine Cat, not even to Sandstorm. "It's as if every cat expects me to be noble and wise, but I'm not. I'll make mistakes, just like I did before. Cinderpelt, I'm not sure I can do this." "Mousebrain!" Fireheart was both shocked and comforted by the teasing note in Cinderpelt's voice. "When you make mistakes, not if, Fireheart, when. I'll tell you about them, believe me." More seriously, she added, "And I'll still be your friend, no matter what. No cat that ever lived was perfect all the time. Blue Star wasn't. The trick is to learn from your mistakes and have the courage to be true to your heart." She turned her head and rasped her tongue over her ear. "You'll be fine, Fireheart. Now let's go." Fireheart let her take the lead down the slope and across the two-leg farmland. The two cats picked their way over the sticky earth of a plowed field and skirted the two-leg nest where the two loners, Barley and Ravenpaw, lived. Fireheart kept a lookout, but there was no sign of them. He was sorry not to see them, for both cats were good friends to ThunderClan, and Ravenpaw had once trained alongside Fireheart as an apprentice. The distant barking of a dog sent shivers through Fireheart's fur, as he remembered the horror of being chased by the pack. Keeping to the shadows of the hedges, they eventually reached the thunder path and crouched beside it, their fur ruffled by the wind of monsters racing past them. The strong reek of their fumes flooded Fireheart's nose and throat, and his eyes stung. Cinderpelt braced herself beside them, waiting for a space between the monsters when it would be safe to cross. Fireheart felt anxious for his friend. Her leg had been permanently injured in an accident at the edge of the thunder path many moons ago, when she had been his apprentice. The old injury would slow her down. "We'll go together," he meowed, feeling the familiar guilt that he had not prevented her accident. "Whenever you're ready." Cinderpelt gave a tiny nod. Fireheart guessed she was afraid, but she wouldn't admit it. A moment later, after a brightly colored monster flashed past, she meowed, "Now!" and limped rapidly onto the hard, black surface. Fireheart bounded at her side, forcing himself not to leave her behind even though his heart was hammering, and every instinct screamed at him to run across as quickly as he could. He heard the roar of a monster in the distance, but before it arrived, he and the Medicine Cat were safe in the hedgerow on the other side. The Medicine Cat let out a gusty sigh. "Thanks StarClan, that's over!" Fireheart murmured agreement, though he knew they still had to face the return journey. Already the sun was sliding down the sky. The land on this side of the thunder path was less familiar to Fireheart, and every sense was alert for danger as they began to climb toward Highstones. But all he could hear was prey scuffling in the scanty grass. The tempting scent flooded his mouth, and he wished he were allowed to stop and hunt. As Fireheart and Cinderpelt reached the foot of the final slope, the sun was setting behind the peak. The evening shadows were lengthening, and a chill crept over the ground. Above his head, Fireheart could make out a square opening beneath an overhang of rock. We've reached Mothermouth, Cinderpelt meowed. Let's rest for a moment. She and Fireheart laid down together on a flat rock while the last of the light died from the sky, and the stars of Silverpelt began to appear. The moon flooded all the landscape in a cold, frosty light. It's time, meowed Cinderpelt. All his misgivings coursed through Fireheart once again, and at first he thought his paws would not carry him. But he rose and began walking forward, the sharp stones biting into his pads, until he stood beneath the ark known to the clans as Mothermouth. A black tunnel yawned into darkness. From his previous visit, Fireheart knew there was no point in straining his eyes to see what lay ahead. The blackness was unbroken all the way to the cavern where the moonstone lay. As he hesitated, Cinderpelt stepped forward confidently. Follow my scent, she told him. I will lead you to the moonstone, and from now on, until the ritual is over, neither of us must speak. But I don't know what to do, Fireheart protested. When we reach the moonstone, lie down and press your nose to it. Her blue eyes gleamed in the moonlight. StarClan will send you sleep, so you may meet with them in your dreams. There was a forest full of questions that Fireheart wanted to ask her, but none whose answers would help him overcome the creeping dread he felt. He bowed his head in silence and followed Cinderpelt as she made her way into the darkness. The tunnel sloped steadily downward, and Fireheart soon lost his sense of direction as it wound back and forth. Sometimes the walls were so close together that his fur and whiskers brushed the sides. His heart thumped wildly, and he opened his mouth to draw in Cinderpelt's comforting scent, terrified at the thought that he might lose her. At last, he realized that he could see Cinderpelt's ears outlined against a faint light ahead. Other scents began to reach him, and his whiskers twitched in a flow of cold, fresh air. A heartbeat later, he rounded a bend in the tunnel, and the light grew suddenly stronger. Fireheart narrowed his eyes as he padded forward, sensing that the tunnel had opened out into a cave. High above his head, a hole in the roof showed a chink of night sky. A shaft of moonlight shone through it, falling directly onto a rock in the center of the cavern. Fireheart drew in his breath sharply. He had seen the moonstone once before, but he had forgotten just how startling it was. About 3 tail lengths high, tapering its top, it reflected the moonlight in its dazzling crystal, as if a star had fallen to the earth. The white light lit up the whole cave, turning Cinderpelt's gray fur to silver. She turned toward Fireheart and signaled to him with her tail to take his place beside the moonstone. Unable to speak, even if he could think of anything to say, Fireheart obeyed. He lay down in front of the stone, settling his head on his paws so that his nose touched the smooth surface. The cold was a shock, so that he almost drew back, and for a moment he blinked at the light of stars sparkling in the depths of the stone. Then he closed his eyes and waited for StarClan to send him sleep. Brindleface drew back to sit with the other cats of StarClan again, and another familiar figure took her place. Guilt washed over Fireheart as he recognized Swiftpaw. I'm sorry, he murmured as he looked into the apprentice's eyes. It was my fault you died. Angry at Bluestar's refusal to make him a warrior, and desperate to prove himself, Swiftpaw had gone out to track down whatever was preying on the cats in the forest. The dog pack had killed him, and Fireheart knew he would blame himself forever for not trying harder to make Bluestar change her mind. But Swiftpaw showed no anger now. His eyes shone with a wisdom far beyond his age, as he touched his nose to Fireheart's. "With this life, I give you mentoring. Use it well to train the young cats of your clan." The life Swiftpaw gave him was a pang of anguish so great Fireheart thought it would stop his heart. It ended in a jolt of pure terror and a flash of light red as blood. Fireheart knew he was experiencing what Swiftpaw had felt in the last moments of his life. As it ebbed away, leaving Fireheart gasping, he began to feel like a hollow in the ground as rain falls into it and spills over. He thought that his strength would hardly sustain him to receive lives from the 3 cats that were still to come. The first was Yellowfang. The old medicine cat had the same air of obstinate independence and courage that had impressed and frustrated Fireheart in equal measure when she was alive. He remembered the last time he had seen her, dying in her den after the fire. Then she had been in despair, wondering if StarClan would receive her, even though she had killed her own son, Broken Tail, to put an end to his bloodthirsty plotting. Now the gleam of humor was back in her yellow eyes, as she stooped to touch Fireheart. "With this life I give you compassion," she announced. "Use it well for the elders of your clan and the sick, and all those weaker than yourself." This time, even knowing the pain he would have to bear, Fireheart closed his eyes and drank in the life hungrily, wanting all of Yellowfang's spirit, all of her courage and her loyalty to the clan that was not hers by birth. He received it like a tide of light surging through him. Her humor, her sharp tongue, her heartedness, and her sense of honor. He felt closer to her than ever before. "Oh, Yellowfang," Fireheart whispered, his eyes blinking open again. "I've missed you so much." The medicine cat was already moving away. The cat who took her place was younger, stepping lightly, the sparkle of stars in her fur and in her eyes. Spotted Leaf, the beautiful tortoiseshell who had been Fireheart's first love. She had come to him in dreams, but he had never seen her as plainly as this since she had been alive. He breathed in her sweet scent as she bent over him. This cat, more than any, was the one with whom he wanted to speak, because the time they had together had been too short to let them share their true feelings. "Spotted Leaf, with this life I give you love," she murmured in her soft voice. "Use it well, for all the cats in your care, and especially for Sandstorm." There was no pain in the life that poured into Fireheart now. It held the warmth of the high sun in Greenleaf, burning to the tips of his paws. It was pure love. At the same time, he experienced the sense of security he had known as a tiny kit, nuzzling his mother. He gazed up at Spotted Leaf, wrapped in a contentment he had never known before. He thought he caught a proud gleam in her eyes as she turned away, and his disappointment that she had not stayed to talk to him was mixed with relief that she approved of his new choice. Now he had no reason to fear that he was being unfaithful to Spotted Leaf in his love for Sandstorm. At last, Bluestar approached Fireheart. She was not the old, defeated cat Fireheart had known recently, her mind giving way under the stress of her clan's troubles. This was Bluestar at the height of her strength and power, prowling toward him across the clearing like a lion. Fireheart was almost dazzled by the glory of starlight around her, but he forced himself to meet her blue gaze squarely. "Welcome, Fireheart, my apprentice, my warrior, and my deputy," she greeted him. "I always knew you would make a great leader one day." As Fireheart bowed his head, Bluestar touched him with her nose and went on. "With this life I give you nobility and certainty and faith. Use it well as you lead your clan in the ways of StarClan and the warrior code." The warmth of Spotted Leaf's life had lulled Fireheart, and he was unprepared for the agony that shook him as he received Blue Star's. He shared the fierceness of her ambition, the anguish she had suffered when she gave up her kits, the ferocity of battle after battle in the service of her clan. He felt her terror as her mind fragmented and she lost her trust in StarClan. The rush of power grew stronger and stronger until Fireheart thought his pelt would never contain it. Just as he thought he must yowl his pain or die, it began to ebb, ending in a sense of calm acceptance and joy. A long, soft sigh passed through the clearing. All the StarClan warriors had risen to their paws. Blue Star stayed in the center of the clearing and signaled with her tail that Fireheart should rise too. He obeyed her shakily, feeling as if the fullness of life inside him would spill over when he moved. His body felt as battered as if he had fought in the hardest battle of his life, and yet his spirit soared with the strength of the lives he had been granted. "I hail you by your new name, Firestar," Blue Star announced. "Your old life is no more. You have now received the 9 lives of a leader, and StarClan grants you to the guardianship of ThunderClan. Defend it well. Care for the young and old. Honor your ancestors and the traditions of the warrior code. Live each life with pride and dignity. Firestar! Firestar!" Just as the forest clans would acclaim a new warrior by name, so the cats of StarClan acclaimed Firestar in rich voices that tingled in the air. "Firestar! Firestar!" Suddenly, the chanting broke off with a startled hiss. Fireheart tensed, aware that something was wrong. Blue Star's glowing eyes were fixed on something behind him. He spun around and let out a choking cry. A massive hill of bones had appeared at the other side of the clearing, many tail lengths high. It shone with an unnatural light, so that Firestar could see each separate bone edged as if with fire, the bones of cats and the bones of prey, all jumbled together. A hot wind swept over him, bearing the reek of carrion, even though the bones gleamed white and clean. Firestar gazed widely around him, seeking help or answers from the other cats. But the clearing was dark. The cats of StarClan had vanished, leaving him alone with the terrible hill of bones. As Firestar felt panic welling up inside him, he sensed the familiar presence of Blue Star by his side, warm fur pressed against his flank. He could not see her in the darkness, but her voice whispered in his ear. "Something terrible is coming, Firestar. 4 will become 2. Lion and tiger will meet in battle, and blood will rule the forest." Her scent and the warmth of her fur faded away as she finished speaking. "Wait!" Firestar yowled. "Don't leave me! Tell me what you mean!" But there was no reply, no explanation of the dreadful prophecy. Instead, the red light that gleamed from the hill of bones glowed brighter. Firestar stared at it in horror. Blood had begun to ooze out between the bones. The trickles merged into a river that flowed steadily toward him, until the stench of blood clung to his fur. He tried to flee, and found his paws were fixed in place. A heartbeat later, the sticky red tide was washing around him, gurgling and reeking of death. "No!" Firestar yowled, but there was no response from the forest, just the steady whisper of blood lapping hungrily at his fur. Warriors Original Series The Darkest Hour by Aaron Hunter. Chapter 5. Firestar jolted awake in terror. He was lying in the cavern beneath high stones, with his nose pressed against the moonstone. The shaft of moonlight had vanished, and only the faintest glimmer of starshine lit the cave. But there was no relief in waking up, for the stench of blood was still all around him, and his fur felt hot and sticky. Heart thudding wildly, Firestar scrambled to his paws. Across the cave, he could just make out Cinderpelt. She had risen too, and was signaling urgently to him with her tail. Firestar's first impulse was to pour out to her all that he had seen, but he remembered her instructions to keep silent until they had left Mothermouth. Paws skidding over the cave floor in his haste, he pushed past the medicine cat and bolted into the tunnel. As he stumbled upward toward the open air, following his own scent trail along the dark passage, the way seemed twice as long as before. Firestar's fur scraped against the tunnel walls, and he was filled with the horror at the thought of being buried alive. The air felt too thick to breathe, and his panic grew in the unbroken blackness of the tunnel. He began to imagine that it would never end, that he would be trapped forever in blood and darkness. Then he saw the pale outline of the tunnel entrance, and burst out into the still night air, where the moon was sinking behind thin clouds. Firestar dug his claws into the loose earth of the hillside, while shudders passed through his body, from nose to tail. A few moments later, Cinderpelt emerged behind him and pressed herself against his side until he managed to control his dreadful shivering and his breathing steadied. "What happened?" she asked quietly. "Don't you know?" Cinderpelt shook her head. "I know that the ritual was interrupted. The scent of blood told me that. But I don't know why." She looked deep into his eyes. Her own were burning with concern. "Tell me, did you receive your 9 lives in your name?" Firestar nodded, and the medicine cat relaxed slightly. "Then the rest can wait. Let's go." For a moment, Firestar felt too exhausted to move, but he did not want to stay anywhere near Mothermouth and the terrible things he had seen in the cave. Shakily, paw step by paw step, he began to descend the hill. Cinderpelt padded beside him, sometimes nudging him toward an easier route, and Firestar was grateful for her unquestioning presence. As they drew further away from the tunnel, the stench of blood faded from his mouth and nostrils. Still, Firestar felt that even if he washed for a moon, he would never get rid of the last traces from his fur. He began to feel stronger, but he was still very tired, and as soon as the rocky hillside gave way to grass, he flopped down in the shelter of a hawthorn bush. "I've got to rest," he meowed. Cinderpelt tucked herself into the grass beside him, and for a few moments the two cats shared tongues in silence. Firestar wanted to tell the medicine cat what he had seen, but something kept him silent. Partly he wanted to protect her from the dreadful fear that he had felt. Even if she could explain what Bluestar's prophecy meant, would it help to have another cat look forward to the future with the dread that he felt? And partly, he hoped that if he never spoke of the dreadful vision, it would not come true. Or was there a curse on his leadership that nothing could avert? Bluestar had told him before she died that he was the fire who would save the clan. How could that be true, if the fire was quenched by the tidal wave of blood he had just seen? Firestar had experienced prophetic dreams before, and he had learned to take them seriously. He could not ignore this, especially when it came at such a significant moment, while he was receiving his 9 lives in his new name. Cinderpelt broke into his reverie. It's okay if you don't want to talk about it yet, you know? Firestar pushed his muzzle into her fur, grateful for her warmth. I'll think about it first, he meowed slowly. Right now, it's too close. He shivered again at the memory. Cinderpelt, he went on. I've never told any cat this before, but sometimes I have dreams that tell me about the future. Cinderpelt's ears twitched in surprise. That's unusual. Clan leaders and medicine cats commune with StarClan, but I never heard of ordinary warriors having prophetic dreams. How long has this been going on? Since I was a kitty pet, Firestar admitted, remembering the dream of hunting a mouse that had first driven him into the forest. But I don't know if the dreams come from StarClan. After all, before he had come to the forest, he hadn't even known about StarClan. Could they have been watching over him even then? The medicine cat's eyes were thoughtful. In the end, all dreams come from StarClan, she murmured. Do they always come true? Yes, Fireheart replied. But not always the way I expect it to. Some are easier to understand than others. Then you should bear that in mind when you're trying to understand this latest dream. Cinderpelt gave him a comforting lick. Remember, Firestar, you're not alone. Now that you're leader of the clan, StarClan will share many things with you. But I'm here to help you interpret the signs. Tell me as much or as little as you want. Though Firestar was grateful for her understanding, Cinderpelt's words chilled him. His new relationship with StarClan was driving him along new paths where he might not want to go. For a few heartbeats, he longed to be no more than a warrior again, hunting with Graystripe, or sharing tongues with Sandstorm in the den. Thank you, Cinderpelt, he meowed, forcing himself to his paws. I promise I'll talk to you whenever I feel the need. But even though he meant what he said, deep down, he wondered how helpful she would be. Firestar couldn't help feeling that this was something he had to face alone. He let out a long sigh. Let's keep going. However much Firestar longed to get home, his strength was failing. Since the discovery of the dog pack and the heart-stopping dash through the forest to lead them to the gorge, he had eaten little, and scarcely slept except to dream. The long journey to Highstones and the agony of receiving his 9 lives, followed by the terrible vision, had taken all he had to give. His steps became slower and more uncertain. They were passing Barley's farm when the medicine cat gave his shoulder a sharp nudge. That's enough, Firestar, she meowed firmly. As your medicine cat, I'm telling you that you need to rest. Let's see if Barley and Ravenpaw are at home. Good idea. Firestar felt too relieved at the prospect of resting to argue. Cautiously, the 2 cats approached the 2-leg barn. Firestar was worried that the dogs might be unchained, but their scent was faint and distant. Much stronger was the scent of cats, and as they drew closer, Firestar spotted a muscular black and white Tom squeezing himself through a gap in the door. Barley, he meowed in greeting. It's good to see you. You know Cinderpelt, our medicine cat? Barley gave both cats a brisk nod. It's good to see you, too, Fireheart. Firestar, Cinderpelt corrected him. He's clan leader now. Barley's eyes widened in astonishment. Congratulations! But that must mean Bluestar must be dead. I'm sorry. She died as she lived, protecting her clan, Firestar told him. I can see there's a story to tell, meowed Barley, turning back to the barn. And Ravenpaw will want to hear it. Come on in. Inside, the barn was warm and dark, full of the scent of hay and mice. Firestar listened to the telltale scuttering noises, and his head spun with hunger. A soft place to sleep, and all the prey you can eat, he remarked, trying not to let his desperate hunger show. Better not tell ThunderClan, or they'll all be out here wanting to be loners. Barley chuckled softly. Ravenpaw, he called. Come and see who's here. A dark shape sprang down from a nearby stack of hay with a welcoming purr. As an apprentice, Ravenpaw had been the only cat in ThunderClan who knew the truth about the death of Redtail, that he had been murdered by Ravenpaw's mentor, Tigerstar. When Tigerstar tried to kill his apprentice to prevent him from reporting what he had seen, Firestar had found this new home for him. The life of a loner suited Ravenpaw much better than that of a warrior, yet he had never forgotten his birth clan, and remained a loyal friend to his former clanmates. So, Bluestar is dead, he murmured, when Barley had passed on the news. His eyes clouded with grief. I'll never forget her. Barley gave a comforting rumble in his throat, and Firestar sensed how welcoming he must have been to the scared young apprentice who had come to him so many moons ago. Straightening up, Ravenpaw flashed the black and white cat a grateful glance. So, you're a clan leader now, he continued to Firestar. StarClan made a good choice. He led the way to the other side of the barn. Would you like to hunt? That would be great, replied Cinderpelt. She gave Firestar a questioning look and murmured, Shall I catch something for you? In spite of his exhaustion, Firestar shook his head. A fine clan leader he would make if he couldn't catch his own prey. He stood alert, listening, and dropped into the hunter's crouch when he heard a soft scuffling deep within the hay. Pinpointing the mouse by hearing rather than sight, he sprang and dispatched the creature with a swift bite. Ravenpaw was lucky, Firestar reflected as he picked up the prey in his jaws and patted back to the others to eat. This was twice the size of the leaf-bare thin mice in the forest, and easier to catch in the shadows of the barn. He gulped it down in a few famished mouthfuls, and felt his strength beginning to return. Have some more, Ravenpaw urged. There are plenty here. When Firestar and Cinderpelt had eaten as much as they could manage, they lay in the soft hay, sharing tongues with their friends and bringing them up to date with clan news. Ravenpaw and Barley listened, their eyes huge with shock, as Firestar told them about the dog pack. I always knew Tigerstar was bloodthirsty, Ravenpaw meowed. But I didn't think he would ever try to destroy a whole clan like that. Thank StarClan he didn't succeed, Firestar replied. But he came pretty close. I don't want to go through anything like that again. You'll have to do something to stop Tigerstar now, before he tries something else, Barley pointed out. Firestar nodded. He hesitated, then confessed, But I don't know how I'm going to do anything without Bluestar. Everything seems dark and overwhelming. He said nothing about the interpretation of his leadership ritual, or the horror of his dream, but he saw from the sympathetic look in Cinderpelt's eyes that she knew what he was thinking. Remember, the whole clan is behind you, she meowed. No cat will ever forget that you and Bluestar saved us from the pack. Maybe they expect too much of me. Nonsense! Cinderpelt's tone was bracing. They know you're going to be a great leader, and they'll all stand by you to the last breath. So will I, Ravenpaw offered, startling Firestar. The sleek black Tom looked slightly embarrassed as Firestar turned to look at him, but he went on. I know I'm not a warrior, but if you want my help, you have only to ask. Firestar blinked his gratitude. Thank you, Ravenpaw. May I come to the camp soon? Ravenpaw asked. I'd like to pay my last respects to Bluestar at her burial place. Yes, of course, Firestar replied. Bluestar gave you the right to go where you like on ThunderClan territory. There's no reason to change that now. Ravenpaw dipped his head. Thank you. As he looked up again,